This is episode number 54 of Road Noise, Life 1 Mile at a Time, Radio Days. Hello once again, and thank you for joining me for Road Noise, Life 1 Mile at a Time. I'm your host, Michael Blackston, and you're sitting alongside me in the passenger seat as we commute to and from my work. This morning we're going to Jasper, Alabama. It's been a rough morning a little bit for me, not because I felt bad, just because I was sleepy. When I got up this morning at 4 o'clock and got going, I felt fine. The alarm went off. I was a little bit groggy, but once my blood got flowing this morning, I felt like I was fine. And I got in the car and started the commute, and as the commute went on, the sleepier I got again. I didn't get enough sleep last night. I got about 6, maybe a little under 6 hours of sleep, and that's really not enough, especially when I'm going to be doing a 5-hour commute the next day. But I've done it a million times. It's just that this morning I had a rough time, probably because my body's just so torn down from all of the healing and stuff that I've had to do from the surgery I had for skin cancer. And so I had a rough time, and I thought to myself, well, get started recording a podcast episode, and if you do that, then you'll wake up, you'll feel good, everything will be great. But I couldn't get in the mood. I just really was like, I can't think of anything that I really want to talk about. I did have a topic suggestion this week from my friend DeVere, who is a listener that contacted me and told me she thought that she would like to hear my thoughts on death/loss in a person's life, and apparently those things have kind of been on her mind, and she wanted to know my take on it, and I'm going to talk about that in a future episode, probably in the next couple of episodes within that time. But that's something I want to think about a little bit more, and I want to make some good quality notes on it without just kind of throwing it up against the wall and seeing if it sticks. It's a heavy subject that I want to put some thought into, and being a Christian, it's going to have a really spiritual aspect coming from me, and I want to make sure that I mold that episode right. So I didn't want to throw that against the wall, and I just really couldn't think of anything. And then it dawned on me that I had some show notes from an episode I tried to do. Episode 53 was originally supposed to be Radio Days, but I recorded an entire episode, almost an hour's worth. I'm going to try to dumb it down a little bit in this episode, so it's not quite an hour. I don't want to go that long if I can help it, but if I do, I do. But when I recorded that episode on the way home from one of my trips a couple of weeks ago and started listening back to it to just make sure that all the audio sounded okay, there was this horrible buzz underneath the audio, and the reason was because I didn't have much battery on my laptop, and I had to plug in my power inverter into the cigarette lighter port on my car in order to power the laptop, which is where my microphone goes straight into my laptop via USB and records straight onto my laptop. And there's some sort of interference that makes that buzz, and so it just sounded awful, and I wasn't going to release that to you. So I lost a whole episode, but I realized I had the show notes. Last week I was going to redo the episode, but I wasn't feeling it. And as I remembered that this week, and after I stopped this morning, I got through Atlanta and decided I don't need to be so groggy on the road. I'm going to sleep for about another hour. And so I stopped and pulled over in a Quality Inn, in a dark area of a Quality Inn. I said, I don't think they'll care if I'm sitting here just for an hour. Reclined back, took a little short nap, and when I woke up 40 minutes later, the sun was up. I felt bright, I felt crisp, and rearing and ready to go to get to Jasper, Alabama, and to record an episode of Road Noise. So here we are. I am ready to record Radio Days, and I'm going to tell you the story shortly of how I became a radio announcer. I don't do that for a living now because, frankly, there's not a lot of money in it. I got out of it for specific reasons, and part of it was because I really didn't see a future for myself with having a wife and hopefully starting a family. I had other things and other plans that I wanted to do, but I loved that job. And once radio is in a person, it's hard to get radio out of a person. And for years, not doing radio, I would think about how much I missed it, how much I missed being behind a microphone and opening that mic and talking to can't speak this morning. Maybe that's a good reason I'm not in radio. I can't say my words right. Talking to an audience, having listeners, communicating, it's another reason that it is so important for you to get back to me, and why it means so much for me for listeners to contact me, because when I worked in the radio business, I heard from listeners all the time. The moment I walked into the station and started my shift, I would have just gobs and gobs of people calling me and talking to me, a lot of them regulars that I had built relationships with and I talked to all the time, and they'd call the DJ and we'd talk, and I built friendships, and I wanted that for podcasting. And when I found out that podcasting was a thing, I was able to scratch that radio itch. And not only that, but I was able to do it in a way that molded the show into a form that was mine. When I started doing radio, I realized you don't just open the mic and do your thing. You have music directors, you have station directors, station managers, all these people that tell you really what you were supposed to say and when you're supposed to say it. In fact, a couple of times I got into a little bit of trouble by bucking that system and trying to kind of go out on my own and do some things that were really not supposed to be done, say some things that were really not supposed to be said, kind of get my own voice. And I wasn't working in stations where that was a thing, and I didn't have a popularity where I kind of had the license to do that. Podcasting gives me that. Nobody can tell me what I can and can't say. If I wanted to use a profanity-laced tirade, which if you listen to the show, you know that's not going to happen for me because I'm a Christian. I don't use that kind of a language. But if I wanted to, I could. It's my show. All I'd have to do is say that there was explicit lyrics in the description of the show, or just explicit language, and let you know that that's way, and then I could just do that if I wanted to, kind of like satellite radio. Nobody could tell me boo about anything. Nobody could say you can't do that. Again, I would never do that. I believe in family-oriented content, and you'll always have that from me. But I got into radio originally because when I came out of high school, I had auditioned for a theme park organization that has theme parks all over the country. And I got hired for the country music show in one of them. And due to the manager of this particular park having a nephew that wanted a job, I was kind of booted out and told that I could come back in a different capacity the following year, but this guy's nephew was going to take my job. And, it's life. It happens. I was bummed about it at first, but it happens. But coming out of high school, I wanted to be an entertainer, and that was my ticket in. And I was so bummed, I decided when I quit. I decided I wasn't going to come back that following year. I was going to do something different. And I went home and we talked about it with my mom and my stepdad, and we decided that close by I could take classes and get an associate's degree in radio and television broadcasting. That way I could have some form of entertainment education and get started in that. Well, I went to radio and television broadcasting school. I didn't get my associate's degree because it was a 2-year degree that required other classes, and I had a math class that I've never been great at math. I can do it if I can understand it and ask a lot of questions, but the teacher that I had wouldn't even allow you to ask questions. He was a foreign man who I've forgiven him a long time ago, but the man was an awful teacher. He could barely speak English. He would not allow you to ask any questions. He wouldn't explain anything. He put everything up on the board, gave you a test the next day, and that was it. For somebody like me who needs a little TLC when it comes to math, I failed it miserably, and it's the only class I failed. I passed everything else in that 2-year degree with flying colors, but they refused to give me my degree. But that's okay. I got a job full-time in radio by the end of the first half of my college career, first year. I ended up working full-time for a radio station in Anderson, South Carolina, WRIX FM 103.1. So, what I'm going to do in the rest of this episode is tell you some stories about 4 people that came into my life and the stories that go along with those people that came into my life via radio that had kind of molded my life and my outlook on things, and were just important people in my life. And everybody loves to hear stories about radio and what goes on in the radio station. That's why some of the best sitcoms and stories have been about radio. You think WKRP in Cincinnati was a classic show that you got to see the inside workings of a radio station. Same thing with talk radio back in the 90s. And I think one of the reasons it intrigues people is because they hear what comes over the radio speakers in their car, but you can't see what's going on behind the scenes. Very similar to why people get interested in what's going on backstage in the wings of a theater, or people like to see what's going on behind the set in a movie production. You don't get to see that stuff, and so there's some curiosity. So I'm going to tell you some stories about that you might not get to hear, type of content that you might not get to hear just by listening to the radio. So the first person I want to talk about is a guy I knew in the first radio job I ever got. His name was Kevin. I'm not going to give you his last name. His wife I haven't spoken to her in years and years, but still, I don't know that if she ever heard this, if she would want me giving his last name out or anything like that. So I'm just going to tell you his first name. His first name was Kevin. And this was back in the early 90s. I got my job, my very first radio job, at WRIX AM 1020, Southern Gospel. They needed somebody. They called the guy who was the teacher of radio and television broadcasting, and radio was the first thing that they taught you in that 2-year degree. You went radio the first year and then television production in the second year. And they called and said, we need somebody to come in on Sunday mornings to spin some records and press play for church services. It was a great in for somebody like me because I was just getting started. It was a little more than an internship. I got paid on Sunday mornings and that was it. But I had a radio show and I actually got to have a couple of hours of live time, taking requests from people who called in and had certain songs they wanted to hear played. But for the most part on Sunday mornings, it was playing church services. Now remember, this was Southern Gospel. There was a big listenership, actually. The AM side had a wide reach, and there was quite a big listenership to AM 1020. It was mostly an older clientele because, frankly, in the Southern Gospel genre, you've got a lot of people that love that genre, but they tend to be a little bit older, mature type people. So I started that, and a few weeks in, I got a phone call, or a guy came into the studio, whoever it was, I think it was the station manager for the FM side, came in and said, Michael, we just had an opening on the FM side that's a country format. We think your voice better suits a country format, but it is a full-time job. It is 6 days a week. I worked Sunday through Monday. I worked Sunday mornings over there, and then I would work Monday through Friday, 7 to midnight, and have a live show, 7 to midnight. That's 4 hours a night, every single night during the week. That was great for me because the exams in the radio and television broadcasting class were actually doing mock versions of radio and television show type stuff. And all the kids would be really nervous because they had a fake studio set up in the class with your broadcast just broadcasting over the classroom. And so you would go in and shut the door for your exam, and the first exam I think was like a 10-minute show, and then I think midterm was a 30-minute show, and then I think you had to do like 45 minutes to an hour or something for the final exam. The great thing for me, once I got this full-time job and had a 4-hour live show every night before, half a year into the radio education I was getting, the teacher didn't even give me an exam. He just listened to my show. He said, you're going live on a real radio station 5 nights a week. All I got to do is just listen to your show. And so that's exactly what he did. And so I said all that to tell you about this guy, Kevin, that I met at and really got to know while I was doing my tenure as the FM radio guy from 7 to midnight at 103.1. Kevin was one of those guys that he's your stereotypical radio wild guy. I mean, he was very similar to Howard Hessman's, I can't remember the character's name on WKRP, but Howard Hessman's character, the kind of crazy guy, the main guy. Kevin reminded me quite a bit of him. He was just always laughing, always being funny, always saying something a little bit off the cuff to make you laugh. He was very jovial, always happy. I don't think I ever saw Kevin mad. I remember the time that I was on the air from 7 to midnight. The AM had to sign off. They signed on at sunup and signed off at sundown. So the AM DJ during the week would be signing off right when my shift was starting for the most part, or sometime early in my shift. And I remember at some point I had started doing some sort of public service announcement or live commercial or weather, whatever I was doing. I was talking, I had opened the microphone and I was doing my thing. I'd been there for a while, so I had my chops. I wasn't necessarily nervous, but I had never had to deal with what was about to happen. Kevin had filled in. Now, he was the midday guy. He was the guy that came on right after the morning crew, and he worked from, I want to say, 10 to 3. Yeah, I think that was it, 10 to 3. And then he, this particular day, had switched over after his shift and filled in for the AM guy for the rest of that shift, and he was signing off. And so he signed off the AM station, and there was this huge window, almost the size of the entire wall, straight across from the microphone between the two stations. And so I could look in right at him. The DJs were facing each other. I could look right into him. So I was live. I was talking, doing whatever I was doing. Kevin had signed off, and all of a sudden he saw that I was live. He starts waving his arms, getting my attention while I'm live. You normally, when a jock is live and he's talking, you leave him alone, you let him do his thing. You don't try to distract him. He was distracting me, trying to get my attention. So I'm sitting here talking. I don't know what I was doing. Probably something like a weather forecast. And he's waving his arms. So I'm sitting here trying, partly cloudy, 75 degrees tomorrow. We're going to be looking at so-and-so, blah, 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 blah. So I looked up while I was in the middle of all of that, and Kevin is waving his arms madly. And when I looked at him and kind of in the middle of my whatever I was talking about, kind of shrugged my shoulders and widened my eyes and raised my hands like, what do you want? He stands up in the chair, drops his pants, and moons me, bare butt moons me from the gospel station control room through that window while I'm live. And I lost it. I don't remember what I said. I just remember losing it. I probably said something to the effect of, I'm sorry, something funny just happened here in the studio that I can't talk about, but it was funny, and I'm sorry I lost my kind of control here. But I just lost it, and I had to say something like, I'll come back in a minute, do a commercial. And it was just the funniest thing. I wasn't expecting it. It's not that I wouldn't expect something like that from Kevin, but I didn't expect it, from the gospel side, the gospel studio. I would have expected him to just come in the door of the FM station or studio and drop trowel. But also that he did it while I was live. He knew that I was new and that I could be shaken, and it was kind of like a hazing type of thing, one of those things, is initiation into the world of radio. So that's what my first story with Kevin, and it's just the type of thing this man would do. And it was a shame the day that I heard that he had passed away. We lost Kevin, but we lost Kevin, I think, in the way that he would have wanted to go. Or at least in the place, not necessarily the way, but maybe the place that he would have wanted to go. Kevin was doing a shift at the radio station. He was on the FM side that day, and I think it was an afternoon or maybe an evening. I had already quit. I wasn't working there anymore, but Kevin had remained, and he was a fixture there. And we got word that he had been running a night shift or something, because he was by himself when it happened. But all day long, apparently, he'd been having chest pains. And he just thought it was indigestion or something. He wasn't a small man. He wasn't a hugely obese man, but he had some weight he could lose, and you could tell by the way he ate, he probably was not heart healthy in the least. And he'd been having some chest pains, and he ignored them. Well, they caught up to him while he was on shift. Now, it didn't happen while he was on the microphone, but it did happen while he was on shift. He went around to get a cup of coffee. He was either getting a cup of coffee or coming back from the bathroom, because the bathroom door was right there at the coffee pot there at the station. And he collapsed and died right there in the radio station. I think he died in the radio station. Maybe they got to him and he died on the way or there, but I think he actually died in the radio station, which made it spooky for a little bit while you would work there, because there was a time that I worked briefly later on in life. I went back to work at that radio station just on the weekends because I needed some extra money. They needed a jock. I knew the place, and I did some overnight stuff. And so overnight, when you were by yourself and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and things start making noises and you need to go to the bathroom, and you walk back there, and then you got to go walk back there right to the spot where Kevin collapsed. It's kind of spooky, kind of eerie, and I think Kevin would have thought that was funny. After a while, we started making little jokes when things would go weird at the station and say, "Okay, Kevin, stop playing around," and things like that. But Kevin was a good friend of mine, and he taught me a lot of the ropes of radio, and he helped me kind of learn the person I would be as a jock. And he was one of my first very good friends in radio, and he's sadly missed. I think about him quite a bit, actually, because he was just a good buddy of mine, and may he rest in peace. The next person I want to talk about is a young lady named Sandy. Sandy is one of those people who, she was a listener, or is a listener, but she's one of those that just loves on everybody. She's every jock's bestest buddy. She and I got to know each other when I started working for WESC FM out of Greenville, South Carolina, 92.5. And I was working the midnight to 6 shift. Friday night at midnight, I would go in and work till 6 a.m. Saturday morning, and I'd go right back in Saturday night, midnight, and work into Sunday morning until 6 a.m. And as soon as I walked in, about 5 minutes after my shift started, that phone would ring, and there would be Sandy. I always knew she was very punctual. She and I, and not just she and I, but she and all the jocks, but she had a certain special relationship with every jock that was special in its own way, and so she just became my buddy. I became what she called her Prince of Late Night. I want to say David Letterman at the time was using that title, and that may be kind of where we kind of came up with it, but I was a late night jock, so she called me her Prince of Late Night. And every time she called, she'd say, "How's my Prince of Late Night?" I got to meet her for the first time. I think it was the first time I met her in person when Aaron Tippin, if you'll remember back in the 90s, there was a popular country artist named Aaron Tippin, and he was from that area originally, and he did a concert on the roof of, I want to say the place was called the Music Room, but he did a concert on the roof of a music store, and all of the jocks from WESC were there and doing all the things jocks do at concerts and stuff, and up rolled this lady in a wheelchair. Sandy is in a wheelchair, has been, I think, most of her life, and I heard that voice. She said, "Mike Blackston," and I got to meet her for the first time and got to get my first big old hug from Sandy, and it just was such a wonderful moment. Sandy and I need to get Sandy the information about this podcast. It's been over a decade. It's been probably 15 years, maybe more than that, since I spoke with her. And since I've started podcasting, I've thought about her quite a lot because it's the type of thing she might listen to. I'm not sure how much podcasting she actually listens to. It's just a lot easier to listen to a radio station. But perhaps she would listen to the podcast. And so I need to get this information to her, and I can do that through my good friend Joe Trusty, who has her information. But So I intend to do that. But Sandy used to give us calendars. Every Christmas, everybody would get a handmade calendar. And this isn't something she just print off on the computer and put. These were handmade little calendars. 12-month calendars, and she would go through and she would, draw out by hand every little section, every little block of the calendar for every month, and she would staple it all together in these little calendars, and she would give you a homemade Christmas card and a calendar every single year. If she ever hears this, I want you to know, Sandy, that I miss those calendars. I really do. Every Christmas I think, oh man, another Christmas without a Sandy calendar. It was one of those special things, and especially for somebody like me who appreciates when somebody puts hard work and handiwork, things that they've done with their own hands. They're thinking of you enough to do something like that. Those calendars meant a lot to me, and I think I still may have one or two of them in my treasure box. But it was one of those things you miss after a while. When I quit the radio station, it's one of the first things I thought about was, man, there goes my Sandy calendars. And we used to get them every Christmas, and I sure do miss those. And I wonder if she still makes them. It's one of those things that after a while you might get tired of doing. I don't know if she still does that or not. I'll have to find out. But anyway, Sandy, if you get a chance to listen to the podcast from your Prince of Late Night, now I don't know what you'd call me. Maybe I'll be your Prince of Podcasting. Am I your Prince of Podcasting? If so, then let that be my title to you, dear. She was my number one fan, and I really love and I really miss Sandy, and I'm hoping to reconnect with her here pretty soon. I also want to tell you about a lady named Michelle Chandler. Michelle Chandler and I still have a really tight, close, special relationship. I actually am closer to Michelle Chandler than I am anybody else in my life, because Michelle Chandler is the pseudonym my wife used when she and I worked opposite radio stations at that same time when we were doing the midnight to 6 shifts on the weekend. My wife grew up in radio because her dad was a DJ. She would spend some of her toddler days and baby days on a blanket in a radio station. And so her dad was a DJ at an old AM station that I don't even think exists anymore in Belton, South Carolina. And so she knew the ins and outs of radio when we met. And it was something she'd always wanted to do, and she got the opportunity to be a radio jock part-time. And the reason she took the pseudonym was because she started working at that same AM gospel radio station that I started working at in Anderson. And she was working there, but then also got hired and got the opportunity to work at another radio station in Greenville, South Carolina, that had the same wattage that I had at WESC. It was a big kind of powerhouse radio station. They played light rock, and so she wasn't really competition for me because I played country, and country and light rock don't compete. But at the same time, they are competing for listeners when you can only listen to one radio station at a time. So we were trying to compete for listeners, and so she decided she didn't want the big station that she had just taken the new job at to know that she kept the old job at the other station. So she created a pseudonym, Michelle Chandler, for the new station. And it was funny that there's just really only one story that I can think of about me versus Michelle Chandler as far as competitive. Well, it wasn't even competitiveness, just things that were going on between listeners while she and I were both working those radio stations at the same time. I mean, you could flip the dial a few ticks up from where I was if you'd listen to my voice, and then you could hear my wife's voice at the same time. There was one night that I had a caller call me up, drunk as a skunk. When you work midnight to 6 shifts, callers call in drunk all the time. I mean, half of your listeners have been drinking on the weekend, especially in the country format. And I had this drunk guy call me up, and he starts fussing about this girl at another station down the dial. He had called and requested a song, and she wouldn't play it. Now, you have to understand, at big radio stations, they rarely take requests. I don't even know if they offer it anymore. We used to talk about it and say it every now and then, but they didn't really want us to say we took requests, but we would kind of, every now and then a song would come up someone had already asked for, and it would just come up on the sheet, so we would say it was by request. For instance, we had a music manager. I want to say it was called this traffic director, I think is what that job title is called. I may be wrong, but anyway, a person who listed every song you were supposed to play within every hour, and you had a playlist. So I knew that John Michael Montgomery was coming up, then Reba McEntire, then the Dixie Chicks, and so and so, and every song they played, I had it listed. I didn't have to think about anything. And you weren't supposed to deviate. On occasion I did, but you weren't supposed to deviate from that. However, if I knew the Dixie Chicks was coming up, and although I can't stand the Dixie Chicks, but I'm using them as an example anyway, because I've already said it. Anyway, say the Dixie Chicks certain song was coming up, and I could see that down on the paper, and someone called up before that song was to be played and said, would you play the Dixie Chicks so-and-so? Then I could say, yeah, I'll have that coming up. And then when it came up, I could say, here's the Dixie Chicks by request with so-and-so. Okay, so it sounded like I'm taking requests. Kayla could do that same type of thing, but she hadn't been working there. She didn't work there very long, and so she had not been working there long enough to have really gotten any sort of leniency to change any music or play any requests. And the guy wanted a certain song played, and she couldn't do it. And it never came up, and he'd call, and she couldn't do it. And finally she said, I can't deviate from the playlist. So he called me up. Again, he's drunk, cussing her out. Could not stand her because she wouldn't play his song. So he tried to get me to play a song. What he didn't realize was he was talking about Michelle Chandler, and he didn't realize that it was my wife. He was cussing my wife to me. So I just told him, yeah, I'll play your song. I'll get that coming up here in just a little bit. And I never played it. And he called me back up again. I hadn't heard my song yet. I said, I got that coming up. And I never played it. And then when I never played it, he called my wife back and started fussing to her about me because I wouldn't play his song. And I guess it was kind of mean. I kind of regret it. I should have just been honest with him and said, look, dude, I'm not playing anything. That's my wife you're talking about. I didn't. I had a little fun with him. And maybe I shouldn't have done that. I don't know. That was a long time ago. But that's really the only story that I can think of that involves me and Michelle Chandler, that persona of my wife, together. Because like I said, she didn't work very long. I think I worked 7 years at WESC, but she didn't work very long at that other station. And so that's really the only time I can think about it. I just remember I would drop her off at her station and go to my work, and then when my shift was over, I'd come get her at hers, and we commuted together. And we had such a fun chuckle about that drunk caller playing back and forth between us all night long. And it was also neat because she and I would talk. We were both up, so we'd get to call each other. Two station jocks calling and talking to each other all night long, and it was just kind of a fun time and a neat time in our history because she had such a history with her father being a radio jock, and then she was getting a chance to kind of carry on that tradition. And for me, also her brother, she had one of her siblings did a little time in radio too, so that's kind of a family thing there. I was starting it out in my family, and I'd love to see my son either do a little radio, or my daughter, or maybe even do a podcast. Noah has talked about doing a podcast, and so we may see him get into that a little bit later on and carry on the vocal voice announcing kind of broadcast / production that I do later on from him. Next, I'm going to tell you about Joe. I mentioned Joe earlier. Joe and I have had a special friendship for a long time, and that started the first day I met him at the radio station when I was working midnight to 6 at WESC. He came in, and he was this new guy who was to be trained on the board. I was supposed to spend an extra few minutes with him before he started his shift. Either that or he came in. Actually, I think he came in and sat in for a couple of hours at the end of my shift before he started his. But he had just started, and I had to teach him how to run the board. So he walks in. I'd never met him before, and he hands out, sticks out his hand and says, "Hi, I'm Joe Trusty." And I said, "Joe, what's your last name?" He said, "Trusty." I said, "No, what's your real last name?" He said, "Trusty." And I said, "No, what is your real last name?" Joe Trusty is nobody's real name. You are using a radio name. And he said, "No, I'm not. Joe Trusty's my real name." So he pulls out his wallet and shows me his ID, and sure enough, his name is Joe Trusty. And from that moment on, he and I just clicked. He just had the best personality. He's a man of God, and as well, and we just clicked and started building a relationship that has lasted a long, long time. He's a great, great friend of mine, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to call him in just a few minutes when I stop recording this and give him a big old hidey-ho, how you doing, Joe, kind of deal. But I want to tell you a couple of stories about him too, because there's a couple of things from the radio station that stick out with me. And there's a lot of other things between me and Joe, friendship stories that I could tell, but these two radio station stories always are the top two that stick out to me when I'm talking to Joe, besides Sandy, because Sandy is also, she just loves Joe to death, and, so we have Sandy in common as well. But these two stories, I'm going to tell you first about the Bubba Teeth. He walks in one day, and it's at the end of my shift. There was a time he would come and he would relieve me on Sunday mornings. He did a gospel show on Sunday mornings, and he would come relieve me of my shift. And he'd usually walk in while I was in the newsroom pulling the latest weather forecast, because that was kind of the courtesy that a DJ would do for the next guy coming in. You would get the latest weather forecast, the most updated one, get it and kind of tear it into a little strip and put it on the front of the thing so they could read the latest weather forecast. So that was what I was getting done for him. And he walks in, and I don't pay him any attention. He just stands in the doorway, and I'm pulling everything up. And I look up and say, "Hey, Joe." And he opens his mouth, and he's got a big, huge pair of those fake Bubba teeth in. And the fair was in town, and he goes, "Man, I'm going to ride the Ferris wheel," with those huge Bubba teeth in his mouth. And just the accent he used, and just the way he said that with those Bubba teeth in his mouth, and I wasn't expecting it. It's been only a few times in my life that I have laughed that hard. He just had me rolling with that. It was so funny. And that's the type of thing Joe would do. He's just goofy and like to make you laugh, and that's one of the reasons I love him. He and I we'll leave voice messages for each other, and I'll do this old character named Henry Slade, and he'll do ex-Senator Fritz Hollins on our voicemails. We'll go back and forth and do stuff like that. And so good times with Joe. And the last story I'm going to tell you about him is there was this girl who was I say a girl, she was a young lady, a woman, who was a fan of both me and Joe. And she was one of those people that loved her a radio DJ. And we struck up relationships. She'd call me toward the end of my shift, and then I'd hang up, and she'd end up calling Joe a few minutes later when he relieved me. One night, she called me up at the beginning of my shift and asked, could she come in toward the end of the shift and meet me and Joe? Well, that was against the rules. We weren't to let anybody into the radio station, much less back into the studio area. Even if you did see somebody there in the lobby, you weren't really supposed to do that, but you really weren't supposed to let them back into the studios. And I explained this to her. I said I could get in a lot of trouble. I'm not supposed to do that. No, I really can't. I can't do that. If you want to come get a tour of the studios during office hours, Monday through Friday, I'm sure that can be set up. But as far as meeting me and Joe after hours, can't do that. It's against the rules. Well, she called me back and she begged. And then I said no. And she called me back and she begged. And I said no. So closer toward the middle of my shift, she just was hounding me about it. And she was telling me, I'm not wanting to try anything. I'm not trying to be naughty. I just want to meet you and Joe. And I want to kind of see the inside of a radio station. I want to see what is going on behind the scenes. I said, okay, fine. If I let you in, I will let you in for the last 10 or 15 minutes of my show, and then Joe's going to ask you to leave after the last or first 10 or 15 minutes of his show. You'll get to spend, 30 minutes, maybe an hour in the radio station between our shifts and meet both of us, but then you have to go because we could get in trouble for this, and we do not, and I also told her if Joe says when he comes in, you got to go, then you got to go. I'm not going to make Joe, put his job on the line either for this. So she shows up probably about 30 minutes before the end of my shift. She knocks on the door, or actually rings the doorbell, which makes a light go off in the studio so that there wasn't a sound, but a light would go off in the studio and you knew somebody was at the front door. That way, if you were on the air live, you didn't have ding dong while you were trying to give a forecast or do a commercial. And so she comes in, and she's well dressed. She's not trying to be naughty or anything like that. She's very well behaved. She walks in, she hugs me, she sits down across the microphone, across the control board where guests sit when they're doing interviews and stuff, and she watches. And I showed her the station, and she sat there for the last 30 minutes of my show. Here's the deal. She didn't just get ready. She got ready. She put on Vanilla Field's perfume. Actually, let me rephrase that. I think put on Vanilla Field's perfume is not the right choice of phrasing. She took a bath. She ran a tub of Vanilla Field's perfume and then got in it and rolled around like a crocodile in a death roll in that tub, probably washed her hair in it. When this woman, I could smell it before I got to the door when I let her in. It was, she smelled the Vanilla Fields. And it's not that Vanilla Fields is a bad smell, but I'm telling you what, it permeated. You could almost, when you're driving down the road on a hot day and you can see the steam coming up off the road, or you can see the heat waves in the distance. If I could remember back correctly, I would probably see waves of Vanilla Fields emanating from this woman's body. So she's there. Joe walks in to relieve me. I had already called him and told him she was going to be there, so he was prepared. And he walks in, same thing. Oh, Joe, it's nice to meet you. And she hugged him, and life went on. Well, I had about an hour drive. Joe calls me up, I think the next day. I don't remember if I had a cell phone at that time. I don't think I did. I'm pretty sure I didn't have a cell phone at that time. I think he called me up the next day, or maybe it was the next morning, or the next time he came in to relieve me, whatever. Anyway, we started talking about it, and he said, dude, don't ever let her back in. Don't ever let anybody back in. He said she was nice, and she left a few minutes after he got there. She kind of did the same thing, sat in on his show, got to meet him, and then she left because she said she would. He didn't, have to make her leave or anything. But he said, dude, I didn't know how I was going to get the smell of Vanilla Fields off me. He said she permeated the studio, and I don't know if they'll ever get that smell out. And I knew what he was talking about because my wife asked me when I walked in the door that morning at about 7 o'clock in the morning. It took me about an hour to get home. I walked in the door. She said, I could smell vanilla the second you opened the door all the way through the house, on the other side of the house in the bedroom. I could smell it. She said, what have you been doing? Only women wear Vanilla Fields. And I had to explain it, and I was like, no, it's fine, it's fine. And I told her what went on. I said, if you don't believe me, go ask Joe. And it was fine. But, man, we just refer to her as Vanilla Fields when we talk about it. Miss Fields, rolling around in a bathtub full of perfume. Anyway, those are some of the stories of my radio days. I've got so many more of them. They always say if walls could talk, man, if radio walls could talk. I don't know. Well, if radio walls could talk, you couldn't take your kids to see that movie. I'm telling you that right now. There's a lot of hanky-panky that used to go on behind the walls of radio stations, especially late at night. Now, I never did, but I know people that did. And I'm telling you, interesting life being a radio announcer, being a DJ. Not all it's cracked up to be. It's not as glamorous as it might seem. There's a lot of drinking, coffee that's been sitting there brewed for 24 hours and the pot never got finished, and so you're drinking old coffee because you don't feel like brewing a new pot. Eating. I'll never forget. One more quick story. Taco Bell sponsored a remote broadcast one afternoon that the afternoon jocks did, and they brought like 30 soft tacos to the jocks and just brought them to the remote truck. And most people aren't going to eat but 2 or 3 of those things, and there were only a couple of the jocks there at that remote, so they were probably 20 to 25 soft tacos that they brought back and put into the refrigerator in the back room. And they were still there when I got there on a Friday night, and I was hungry and I wanted some soft tacos. And I ate and ate and ate until I was about to explode. I probably ate 6 or 7 soft tacos that night, and I paid for it the next day. Just that type of thing. You never know what you're going to run into when the door is open to the studio at a radio station. It's interesting. I've got all kinds of stories I could tell, but I'm running out of time. And yeah, here I have gone the better part of an hour already, and I still haven't done my positive review. So let me go ahead and do my positive review real quick. Not a lot to tell this week. I'm just still healing from the surgery I had on my face and forehead from having the Mohs procedure done to remove these skin cancers, and had the stitches taken out Monday, and it's still a little sore and a little irritating and an aggravation keeping them covered and everything, but healing is a slow process, and so I'm going through that and I'm working, and that's pretty much it this week as far as telling you about my week. So the positive review this week, though, is for Michaels and Hobby Lobby. I'm going to give you 2 different franchises, but I'm going to give them both in the same positive review because they're typically the same type of store. If you're an artist or a crafter or just want some good home decor, the prices are not always the lowest at Michaels and Hobby Lobby, but you can get everything you want. You want to go ahead and start shopping for Christmas, go ahead now. If you want to decorate your house and pay that money for decorating your house for Christmas, you can go ahead and do it. Halloween, all that stuff for home decor. And then in the back, there's always the craft and the art supplies. I love Michaels and Hobby Lobby. What I love the most about them, and the reason that I'm giving you this positive review, is because both of them, if you download the app for Michaels or the app for Hobby Lobby on your phone, both of them have a coupon every single week for 40% off of one item. 40% off. That's a huge discount, and it helps me out because when I administrate a group on Facebook called My Everything Arts, and I have started doing a group member of the month. And one of the things that I like to do is award the group member of the month. They're awarded that title and being the group member of the month for their participation in the group, whether they're giving advice to somebody about something they posted or asked advice for, whether they're just making positive comments and reinforcing other group members, or even uploading their own work or things they found on the internet that jive with the group. Their participation and helpfulness in the group, I pick somebody every month to be the group member of the month, and I give them a little reward, and I've been spending anywhere from $15 to $20 a month on that reward, and I'm able to get more bang for the buck and get them more reward for that money I'm spending, because I'll go and buy one item at 40% off from Michaels, and then I'll go down the road and buy another item for 40% off from Hobby Lobby. And so I'm able to get 2 good, decent items at 40% off. One of the things that I have considered doing as well, if I need to get more than a couple of things, is get my wife to go ahead and put that app on her phone, so I could send her through one line with things to get the app and then to get the discount, and then I could get the discount on my thing and to do that at both places, and you've gotten 4 items for 40% off. So I mean, you can really save some money at Michael's and Hobby Lobby, and don't worry, they're not missing it. Every time I go in there, there's a long line that I have to wait behind of people buying stuff. They're not missing it. It is a great promotion, and it is every single week, at least at this recording. It has been every single week they update that 40% off coupon, and I have saved so much money at Michael's and Hobby Lobby. So I want to give you that suggestion. If you've got that type of material you need to buy, download the Michael's and download the Hobby Lobby apps to your smartphone. Use those 40% off coupons, and what they do it at, like, if you buy more than one item, it's only on one item per checkout. So if you're buying more than one item, what they do is they apply that 40% off to the most expensive item. So you don't even have to ask them to do that. They automatically will take the most expensive item. That's the one you get the 40% discount off. So bully for those couple of franchises. I know they're stiff competitors, and I know they probably don't like to be lumped in together much, but hey, I'm giving one of them a positive review. I'm going to give the other one too, because both stores I really enjoy being a patron of, and as an artist and someone who frequently has to buy art supplies and things, that is very, very good for me, and it's the reason that Hobby Lobby and Michael's are the two companies that are my positive review for episode 54 of Road Noise. So if you'd like to get in touch with me, got something to say, you want to give me a suggestion for a topic like Deveri did, feedback at michaelblackston.com. You can also go to roadnoisepodcast.com, and you'll see the show notes for this episode, which, by the way, I will put Hobby Lobby and Michael's, I'll put links to their websites. And all of my positive reviews always have a link to websites on the show notes, and you get that at roadnoisepodcast.com. There you will also find... How southern was that? There you'll also find... Let me try that again. There you will also find buttons and ways to share the podcast via social media. There's also an iTunes button where you can go there and leave me a rating and review, and I would love for you to do that. You can follow me on Twitter at Everything Arts, and if you're an artist and would like to join my Facebook group, just go to Facebook and look up under groups My Everything Arts, and you'll find it there. You can ask to join, and if you do, write a little message and let me know that you heard about it on the Road Noise podcast, and I'm the administrator, so I'll let you in, and we can kind of build a relationship that way too. So thank you for sitting beside me in the passenger seat on this commute to Jasper, Alabama, for episode 54 of Road Noise. I'm Michael Blackston, your host, and together we're learning to live life 1 mile at a time.